Hey, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. For nearly 3 years, authorities looked for Suzanne Morphew, a Colorado mom of two. Authorities were convinced that her husband had murdered her. Finally, in fact, they tried him for that, or they charged him for that. We'll get to that. Finally, on September 22nd, 2023, authorities found her body, allegedly buried in a shallow grave about 45 miles from her home. With the discovery of her body, is Suzanne's husband Barry off the hook, or is he in more trouble than ever? We will talk about that tonight. So welcome as we let everybody come into the live stream, give them a few seconds to come in off the ads. I want to show you a great photo that I took this weekend. I think you'll really like this. Check this out. It was a monarch butterfly at Gibbs Gardens. Love Gibbs Gardens. If you're anywhere remotely near it, you need to go. But they have a huge wildflower meadow, and they had monarch butterflies there this weekend. So I got this shot. So Suzanne Morphew went missing on May 9th or May 10th, 2020. Her last proof of life was on May 9th. When a year ticked by and her body had still not been found, her husband was charged with her murder, her husband Barry. After pushing the case for a full year, prosecutors suddenly reversed course and dismissed the case just 1 week before trial. But they dropped those charges without prejudice. We're going to talk about what that means, and we're going to get into what that means for Barry specifically. Now, this past 2 weeks ago, authorities unexpectedly stumbled across Suzanne's body in a field about 45 miles south of her home in Maysville, Colorado. It was, depending on which account you read, either buried in a shallow grave or the remains were scattered across the field, or perhaps both, I suppose. So then the question comes, is the husband now off the hook? Is he given a pass, or is he back in hot water? That's our topic for today. So as we go in, please be sure to hit the like button. And if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. We'd love to have you back. I'm going to cover 4 topics tonight. First, I'm going to talk generally about the facts of the Suzanne Morphew disappearance and the case. Then I'm going to talk about the disastrous first case against Barry Morphew and what happened in that case, how it went all wrong. Then I'm going to talk about finding the body briefly, and then whether Barry Morphew could be charged again in this case. So we will wrestle with all of that tonight. So let's start with the facts of the case. On May 9th, 2020, Suzanne Morphew sent her last known proof of life. It was a text to the man she was having an affair with. On May 10th, Mother's Day, she was reported missing when she didn't respond to text messages from her daughters or from her husband. Now, that same day, law enforcement found, let me go ahead and share some photos with you. This is Suzanne Morphew. And on that same day, authorities found her bike. You can see it kind of right there in the middle of the screen. Found her bike on a hill off the road near her house. It was down an embankment off the side of the road. And then days later, they found her signature bright blue helmet about a mile away on the side of Highway 50. But they could not find her body. Based on what they found to be suspicious behavior by Suzanne Morphew's husband, Barry, law enforcement arrested him a year after she disappeared, and they charged him with Suzanne's murder. He adamantly denied any involvement in it. And then a bombshell came with trial literally just days away. The state dismissed the charges against him. He walked out of prison a free man, but the dismissal was without prejudice. So we'll talk about what that means in just a minute. And now, of course, last week, the state found Suzanne Morphew's body. So we'll talk about that as well. Now, let's talk about why it was that the state charged Barry Morphew in the first place. What was the key evidence against him? And I think I'll do a whole video on this later. So I'm just going to talk about 6 pieces of evidence that were talked about at the time that we knew were coming at the trial that never happened against Barry Morphew. So this is just a shortened version of when I'll do a full video later, I think. Especially if you want one, be sure to put that in the comments so I'll know that you're interested in a full version of what the facts were lined up against Barry Morphew. So one of the biggest ones was that investigators, and I'll put this back in too because I have a photograph of this to show you. Investigators found a syringe cap like the one you see in this picture, and they found this syringe cap for a tranquilizer dart, or at least that's what they thought it could have gone to, in the dryer. They also found in the dryer a pair of khaki shorts that Barry had been wearing on May 9th, the last day when there was proof of life from Suzanne. And he had been wearing khaki shorts that same day. So there was also, let me pull that out. There was also a .22 caliber round on the floor of Suzanne's bedroom next to her side of the bed. Barry owns a .22 caliber pistol, which he says he uses to shoot chipmunks. And there was some strange testimony around the whole chipmunks, or strange, at least, discussion around the whole chipmunks thing. We'll probably get into that in that other video. Now, for 2 years, a third point, for 2 years, Suzanne had been having an affair with a married man. She had not even told her best friend about this. His name was Jeff Liebler. He had 6 kids of his own. And her last proof of life was texting a selfie to him. Now, the fourth piece of evidence I'm going to throw out just for tonight's short version is that Barry's truck door was open 7 times between 3:25 a.m. and 3:49 a.m. First, it backed up toward the house, and then the door was opened 7 times. So law enforcement suggested maybe he was loading something into the truck, and that's why all of that activity happened in the middle of the night. Now, the 5th point I want to bring out is that he had a job in Broomfield, Colorado, which is just barely north of Denver, on Monday. That the plan was for him to pick up an employee of his, Morgan Gentile, at 5:30 p.m. on May 10th. But instead, he left for the job all by himself, not picking up Morgan, at 5 a.m. on Sunday instead of waiting till 5:30 and instead of taking his employee. And law enforcement wanted to know, why the rush? Why did you need all that extra time up there in Broomfield, Colorado? Why didn't you just stay and go through with your original plan? So, and probably, at least in my view, the most concerning piece of evidence related to Barry throwing out trash bags. He was pictured all over throwing out trash bags in different trash receptacles all around. He carried these trash bags, and I'll show you a video here in just a second. But oh, I'm seeing these and you're not seeing them. So let me go back to that. Here is Barry carrying trash bags, and it was all over the place. I'll go ahead and show you the video now that shows him carrying trash bags. There were 5 or 6 different places where he carried these trash bags. He threw trash into trash at a McDonald's, at a men's warehouse. He stopped next to a trash can at a bus station for about 90 seconds. The passenger and the driver's doors on the truck opened. And so they think perhaps he took out trash at that point. He parked by a trash bin near the hotel, put in a trash bag, a tree planter, and also, for some reason, a camouflage jacket. So authorities thought, for all of those reasons, that there was strange behavior by Barry Morphew. Now, there was counter evidence, but since the case never went to trial, I would have to assume we never got all of the counter evidence that the defense would have presented. One thing I know for sure is that the defense talked about there being male DNA found in Suzanne's car. And they suggested maybe that had something to do with it. Now, blood was not found in the cars in the house, so that wasn't something that was helpful to them. And of course, there was no body, which certainly helped the defense because it's harder to prove a death occurred when you don't even have a body. But now let's talk about that disastrous first case against Barry Morphew. Let's talk about how that whole prosecution went wrong and what happened. Now, during like in the middle of the case, the local DA came under fire for all sorts of conduct in all sorts of cases, and specifically including in the Morphew case for failing to produce discovery that should have been produced to the defense team. The DA's law license was even temporarily suspended during the course of the case for failing to get her continuing education. Now, that's not something that would directly reflect on the case, but it just looked bad. It just was something that made the whole situation very difficult for the state to continue. Morphew's team filed a motion for sanctions, and the judge granted that motion. The judge barred 14 of the state's expert witnesses as punishment for failing to participate and to do what it needed to do in terms of discovery. Now, you may remember we saw something similar happen in the Lori Vallow Daybell case when Lori Vallow Daybell's team was able to keep her from getting the death penalty as a sanction for the state not turning over documents and evidence that it was supposed to turn over. So in this case, the judge barred expert witnesses and did things that would point directly at the state's ability to prove its case. One of the things they removed, for example, the judge removed experts in DNA, vehicle data, cell phone data analysts. 14 witnesses were not going to be allowed to testify. The judge also excluded expert testimony about that cap from the tranquilizer syringe. What the state wanted to testify to was that syringe you saw was used to tranquilize Suzanne, or even potentially, I suppose, to kill her, that it was something that would be used with hunting and that it was used on Suzanne to subdue her as Barry, according to the state, killed her. So, but then before trial could even get started, there was a surprise twist as the prosecution dropped all of the charges against Barry Morphew. They dismissed the case, but they did it without prejudice. And now I want to talk about what that means. And I want to show you too what happened because they dropped it without prejudice, Barry walked out a free man. And his family was there to support him. The daughters of Suzanne and Barry very much throughout the process supported their dad. They were filmed with him leaving jail. They also
we haven't been able to heal these past 2 years.
They also went on Good Morning America with him in a show of support. So they clearly supported their dad, and that was part of what the defense made a point of as the case was dismissed. So that's where things stood. And we'll go over what happened when the case was dismissed. I'll show you the document. You'll get to look at all of that. But that's where things stood until September 22nd, when yet another twist occurred. And this time it was that law enforcement found Suzanne Morphew's body. It surprised everybody, including law enforcement. I'm going to show you. Let me add this back. Law enforcement was looking for this woman, Edna Quintana. Edna had disappeared. She was or is 56 years old, a mother of 5, and she went hiking with the man she had been seeing. The boyfriend says that Edna went back down the mountain, but he couldn't find her when he went back down. He has not been named as a suspect at this point. Police were searching for her, for Edna, when they suddenly stumbled across the remains of Suzanne Morphew. So that was a big surprise. And it was also a big surprise because of where they found the remains, because they weren't expecting that. So here's sort of a map of that. It's a Google map, and I just put 3 pins in it. The home is where Suzanne Morphew lived. The body was found about 45 miles south, where you see that red pin. Now, Barry's job had taken him to the north side of Denver, that Broomfield that we had talked about. So law enforcement had been concentrating all of its efforts looking for the body around Suzanne Morphew's home. That's where they thought it would be found. And if anything, it would be north, where Barry went for his job that next day. But instead, they found the body to the south, somewhere they hadn't been planning on, somewhere they hadn't considered, and so they were doubly surprised for all of those reasons. But so the question is, can the state recharge Barry Morphew? And even more importantly, is there any reason for them to do that? Just a second. It says my mat needs power. We don't want to lose in the middle of our stream. That would be a disaster. So let me see if I can. There we go. Okay. So even more importantly, is there any reason for the state to recharge Barry Morphew, or is he now off the hook? Is he now cleared because they found her body? So, and we can take that even a little bit further. Did he narrowly escape an unjust prosecution for killing his wife, if he never committed that crime? Or is the state now a little bit closer to putting Barry Morphew behind bars for the heinous murder of his wife, Suzanne? So let's answer that question legally first. Could he be charged again? Could he be tried again? And the answer legally is going to be yes. Let's take a look at the document that will show you that. This is, first of all, I want to talk about what the Fifth Amendment say, because a lot of you might be thinking, well, but they can't try him again, right? Isn't there double jeopardy? I've heard about double jeopardy, where you can't try somebody twice for the same crime. And that is true. Here's where that comes from. The Fifth Amendment: nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. But that's considered to apply when someone's actually been tried. And in this case, Barry Morphew was not tried, although he spent a significant amount of time in jail and filed a civil suit related to how long he had been incarcerated, and what he believed to be unfairly prosecuted. But this would not be double jeopardy because he was never actually tried. So, and let's take a look at what the state actually filed at the time. They filed a motion to dismiss without prejudice. Now, what that means, without prejudice, means that it is not over and done with. It could be filed again. It's over and done with in the sense that it's been dismissed. It's no longer pending. He's not facing any charges. But without prejudice means it could be brought again if the circumstances were right. So it's also important to look at what the grounds were, because they had to actually get approval from the court for this. So they argued throughout the pendency, or put the state, this is the state's motion. They said, we want to dismiss the case. It's just a week before trial without prejudice. And said throughout the pendency of this case, the people in law enforcement have been unrelenting in our search for Miss Morphew. For some time, a single location has been the target of ongoing investigation. For the reasons expressed below, the people have a good faith reason to believe further investigation into this matter is essential to answering the most consequential question presented by this case, which would be, where's the body, right? As this search cannot be accomplished in the coming weeks due to weather and snowpack conditions, the people respectfully ask this court to dismiss the current indictment against the defendant without prejudice. It could be brought again. It's without prejudice. But notice what they say there, because they say something really interesting. They say, let me see, I'll make it a little bit smaller, and usually that will let me be able to see the bottom part. Okay. They say a single location has been the target, and that's true. They were looking very specifically right around her house. They even are going to get more specific about that in the rest of this motion as they continue to argue to the court. Say a dismissal without prejudice or nolla prosequi is a formal declaration of record by the prosecutor that the government will not prosecute the case further. It is a discharge without an acquittal, and it is not a bar to a subsequent prosecution for the same crimes. So in other words, they can bring it again. It's not a final disposition. It doesn't end the case. And they say it leaves the matter in the same condition as before the charges were filed. Thus, the indictment against the defendant would function as a nullity. Didn't happen, basically, upon its dismissal without prejudice. Now, one of the really fascinating questions that will be asked here is, what about all those sanctions orders against the state? If they try to bring another case against Barry Morphew, what's the status of those? Because according to what the state argued at the time, if the indictment didn't exist, didn't happen, never happened, we'd be starting brand new. So could the state behave properly this time, have no sanctions against it, try the case without them? Or I guarantee you Barry Morphew's side is going to argue all of those sanctions ought to be applied again. Everything that happened before ought to count against the state in the second trial. But we'll keep going because there is still the question, isn't even, does he have anything to do with this? So within the period of the statute of limitations, which usually for murder is, for life, a second indictment or information may be brought on the same charge. The court further held that where delay is a product of valid investigative or prosecutorial purpose, it is not chargeable against the government, even after identical charges were refiled against the defendant based on new investigation. Relevant speedy trial principles were not violated. So the state is basically going to argue that it was able to buy a full extra year without violating Barry Morphew's right to a speedy trial because it was looking for the body of Suzanne Morphew and because it dismissed the case. His side, I guarantee you, will fight this very hard. This next paragraph is really important because of how different it is from what actually happened. As an offer of proof, the people in law enforcement believe we are close to discovering the victim's body. The people were hopeful that the search for and the discovery of the victim's body would be concluded well before trial, but weather has complicated the efforts. Specifically, the area law enforcement has been focused on is in a remote and mountainous region nearby the Morphew residence. And of course, that's not where her body was found at all. Her body was found somewhere different. This area received a significant amount of snow over the winter months before a search could be completed. To date, the area has 5 feet of snow, concealing the location where the people believe Miss Morphew is located, but where in fact she was not located. As a result, the people cannot safely excavate this area and resolve this unanswered question. So that is going to be a huge fight coming up if they try to recharge Barry Morphew. The defense does not need to consent and does not have standing to object. So the state said, the only question here is whether you, the court, believe that we, the prosecution, are doing this in good faith. If we're doing this in good faith, then that's enough. It doesn't matter whether Barry Morphew wants to go ahead and try the case, clear his name, none of that matters. And they're going to keep arguing, the most influential fact of consequence is whether or not Miss Morphew is deceased. If the body proves to be there, further forensic examination could potentially inculpate or exculpate the defendant, which is incredibly important evidence for the jury to hear in determining the merits of the case. That means if we find the body, we may find more evidence. It may be something that will make a difference to the trial. And obviously, that's very true. Second, the court functionally excluded the people's best evidence to move forward in this case by severely limiting our experts' testimony. Remember all those sanctions against them. Even if the court were to partially reconsider its position on the need for such severe sanctions at this late hour, the people would still be left without several key expert witnesses initially. And Barry's team is going to argue you can't buy extra time by dismissing the case and then refiling later. You can't. That's what they'll argue. But in fact, it looks like they weren't planning to re-prosecute him. Certainly, there'd been no move to do that. Now we have a body found. And so we will see what happens. So, sorry, trying to get to my right spot. Okay, without this crucial evidence and without the victim's body, the people cannot move forward at this time in good faith. Ethics demand that prosecutors proceed to trial only in circumstances where a reasonable likelihood of success exists, which, given the court's current rulings and the uncertainty of any further rulings, is impossible to completely ascertain. So they're saying you've sanctioned us so many different ways, we're not totally sure that we can move forward in good faith. We're not sure the remaining evidence we have is sufficient. So that, of course, something else that Barry Morphew's team would argue if the state tried to make new allegations against him and prosecute him again. The state goes on, the public seeks a swift resolution of this case, but more than anything, seeks an indisputable answer as to whether or not Miss Morphew is dead before her killer can be held accountable. Now, we know the answer to that since at last her body actually was found. In the event, and this is a really interesting sentence right here, in the event the case is refiled, the defendant retains all of his rights to further litigation and perhaps collateral estoppel on issues already decided. Now, that's a collateral estoppel would be an issue that's already been decided, and it's not going to be heard again. We already handled that. We already decided that. We've got that taken care of. So the state is saying maybe there would be some issues that were decided in this case that the state wouldn't be able to bring up again. Sort of a hint that possibly maybe the court could rule that all of those sanctions against the state would carry over into the new trial. But it's not a clear statement. It's not a definite, yeah, for sure, that's exactly what they're saying. So but that is what the state filed. They filed this motion to dismiss without prejudice so that they could bring it again. So to answer the question, is Barry off the hook? The answer is no, if you're looking at it just from the legal perspective. He's not off the hook. He could be charged again because it was dismissed without prejudice. It's not double jeopardy, and it could happen again. But there's another question, not just legally, is it possible, but practically. Would the state want to recharge Barry? Do they have a reason to recharge him? A press release put out by Barry's lawyer shows that Barry's lawyers are clearly concerned that that could be an issue. So what they said was what appears to be the overriding focus. They were talking about now that we have found the body, now that Suzanne's body has been found, the overriding focus seems to be a finger pointing right back where it started 3.5 years ago, a movement to blindly reaccuse Barry for Suzanne's death. So obviously Barry's team is concerned that everybody is turning back and looking at him and saying, we still believe you're guilty and that he'll be prosecuted again. And they argue, and I'll sort of summarize this, that she wasn't found anywhere near where the authorities were looking for her. They thought she was going to be found somewhere near the home. They tracked his vehicle and his phone, and they concluded maybe she was buried somewhere near there or left somewhere near there. And she wasn't. She was 45 miles south. That her remains were found in a shallow grave in a dry desert field of sagebrush and natural grasses. And contrary to prior accusations, her remains were not found in a rocky mountainous region near her home, and nor in a location that was a difficult spot to get to, or near the home and impossible to get to due to being in a mine or under frozen tundra and buried under 6 feet of snow. They also said that at no time did the FBI, CBI, Chaffee County Sheriff's Office, DA's office, anybody claim that Barry was in an area south of his home. near Moffat or anywhere near, I don't know if I'll say it right, Saguache County. You people from Colorado can tell me how to pronounce that. I'll get it right next time. At any relevant time frame. It would be ludicrous for anyone to now try to fit the now known facts to prior false assumptions and accusations. And they go on to say he was never south of the house, and that's why they didn't search that area. So the team for Barry is arguing that if you go back now, and that is probably the biggest practical consideration, because all of the witnesses have been sort of forced into taking positions at this point. And the state was looking in the wrong direction. The state was looking right around the house. It was looking north, and instead the body was found south. So practically speaking, some of those witnesses are going to be locked into positions that are going to be difficult for the state to use. It's going to make it difficult to use some of those witnesses, even if they aren't excluded on the basis of misconduct or the basis of what happened at the first trial. So there are, just practically speaking, some things that would make it difficult to charge Barry a second time, but obviously not impossible. So, because as we said, legally, they are permitted to do that. The body, now that Suzanne Morphew was actually probably killed 3.5 years ago, there will be less evidence still available for them to find from the body than there would have been had the body been available immediately after she disappeared. But we don't know. We really have no sense yet of what they'll find when they look at the body. Now, as we now know, she was south of the city. Some of the things that were so odd and suspicious are maybe less so. For example, Barry throwing out all the trash bags. Although I would still put that as the most suspicious thing about the case, it's certainly wasn't any part of Suzanne's body. We can at least tell that because her body was found south of the city. So it must have been something else. Bloody clothes, and yet no blood in the cars or in the house. So it's unclear exactly what could have been in those trash bags. And it makes some of the evidence fuzzier that would have been used against Barry Morphew. So, and then of course, we've got the question of the sanctions and whether those will apply. Whether those sanctions from the first trial will be carried over if they recharge Barry Morphew. On the other hand, this does present a brand new opportunity, an opportunity to get evidence from the body, whether it be something just as the state put in its motion to dismiss, whether that's something that helps or hurts Barry Morphew. Just what's the truth? What are the facts? They may be able to find out more things based on the body or the way it was found or how it was buried, any of those things that we'll just have to wait to find out more about. They may also now re-examine Barry Morphew's cell phone. They may look at some of his driving, and they may look now for different things based on new evidence about where the body was found. So it gives them the chance to focus more on the things that actually relate to where her body was found as opposed to the improper place it was found. So at this point, it will be interesting to see what exactly the state does. Does it feel like this gives it new reason to charge Barry Morphew? And if it does, it's going to be an absolutely fascinating legal issue about what happens with the sanctions and so forth from the first case. That will be really interesting. But right now, what we know, Barry's team is saying, you looked in the wrong place. All of your witnesses said it would be somewhere in this area. It wasn't. That isn't where her body was. That isn't where it was found. You got that wrong, and Barry now ought to be cleared. Everybody ought to see that Barry is cleared. Now, that's not entirely correct because of the fact that the state has the ability to recharge Barry Morphew and to use new evidence that it obtains from having found the body. So I want to say thank you to the moderators, Mama Pinks, to Marlon. Thank you for your help. Be sure to hit the like button if you would, and subscribe. I would love to see you back. We go live Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. So I will see you on Friday at 7 p.m.